Welcome to the real life show, Living with a Chronic Illness. We are your hosts, Cassie and Chelsea. I'm Cassie, a single mom living with a chronic illness who is extremely passionate about living a full and happy life.
And I'm Chelsea. I have a passion for helping people to put themselves first and to be the best version of themselves each and every day.
We came together to create the Spoonies Hub, an uplifting community that offers resources, guidance, support, and offers you the space to be yourself, be heard, and feel understood. We hope that by providing tips and tricks from experts, we help people with chronic conditions to thrive and live the lives they've dreamed of.
This show is not only for those who live with a chronic illness or disability, but their friends, family, spouses, and just anyone else existing on the earth. Our goal is to normalize having a chronic condition by sharing real stories with real people and to show the world how relatable those everyday struggles can be. There's a little something in here for everyone.
And a special shout out to our community at the Spoonies Hub. Thanks to your contributions, we are able to provide flexible work opportunities for Spoonies, donate to our nonprofit to help provide wellness treatments for those who need it, and be able to transcribe our podcast to make it more accessible for all. To learn more, visit our show notes.
Enjoy the show.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the real life show, Living with a Chronic Illness. We are thrilled to bring you a great interview. Listen all the way to the end because it's awesome, but you should really listen all the way to the end of all of our episodes because they are all awesome, and we wouldn't want you to miss even just a minute of the awesomeness. So especially today, we are interviewing Kathleen O'Shea, who is a professor of Literature and Humanities at Monroe Community College in Rochester, New York. And she is a 43-year sufferer of migraines. She has been published in the Greenwood Encyclopedia of World Popular Culture and Opra magazine and is a regular blogger on migraines with Psychology Today.
We had so much fun talking to Kathy. And I know I said this every single time that we had a lot of fun, but we really truly did. Kathy she's a bright light, even though she's been dealing with migraines for 43 years, but she did a great job sharing her experience and talking about this amazing book that she has put together, which will be linked in our show notes. It's a big kind of anthology of a ton of different writers' perspectives on migraines. It's got some creative, it's got some nonfiction, it's got some poetry in it. We talk about it throughout the episode. Go check it out. And Kathy also kind of has a really, what I found, refreshing view on just having a chronic condition. We tend to talk about how even though everyone's striving for balance, she feels like she's not very good at it, but she's okay with that. And so there's some good nuggets in there. Oh, and for people being like, I don't want to just listen about migraines. Kathy does not just have a migraine issue. She also talks about her history with endometriosis. So go listen to all of it. All right. Here's the episode. Hi, everyone. We have a special guest with us today. Cassie and I are talking with Kathy O'Shea. Hi, Kathy.
Hi. Pleasure to be here, Chelsea and Cassie.
Yay. We're so excited to have you on. You have so much to share with the migraine community. And while having chronic migraines is its like own thing in itself, I think that it's also a chronic condition that a lot of people can kind of understand in some ways. Like we were talking before, how I don't have chronic migraines, but I have experienced migraines. And I have friends and family that have chronic migraines. Cassie was sharing some of her experience. And so it's something that I think comes up a lot more common than like, oh, I have joint issues or I have digestive issues, even though those happen a lot as well. But I think migraines are one that are particularly common. So we're so excited to dive in them a little deeper with you.
Great.
Can you start by telling our listeners a little bit about who you are and your story and what's gotten you to where you are today?
Absolutely.
That sentence.
Absolutely. I didn't start out with chronic migraine. I had my very first migraine when I was 14. And I think many of us who suffer with migraine can remember vividly that very first one when it's severe. And so I happened to be camping with my family, and my brother and I were over at a rec center watching believe it or not, I have no idea why, but a Charlie Chaplin film. And all of a sudden I just almost fell over with it, such an intense pain in my head and it was very sudden. There were really no, no clues or warning signs. And my parents had no idea what to do because the pain was so overwhelming. From there, I think it's important to remember that this, I'm 57. And so my first migraine was, let's see, I've got to do the math here. If I was 14.
I know, right? 43 years?
Yeah, 43 years ago. That's right. So 43 years ago, so little was known about migraine.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we really need to remember that, or I need to remember that, because since so little was known about it, there was a lot of presumed about it. And there was a lot of even more stigma attached to it. And it was even more invisible than it currently is. And that's not to say, believe me, that it's not both of those things now. But I went to a neurologist when I was, a teenager, and I was thrown on any number of very strong medications that, of course, were for other conditions, not for migraine, because there were no medications for migraine. I went through every test, known to man, and nothing. They just really couldn't diagnose it with anything other than severe headache, and migraine. But the way it changed my life was significant, even as I was in 8th grade and going into my freshman year in high school. And I was very athletic. I was involved in a lot of sports teams, and I had to give all that up by my sophomore year in high school. And that was a tremendous difficulty for me. So I got involved in a lot of other things, in college and in leadership roles, not college, but high school leadership roles and, extracurricular activities and all these things. And I mentioned that because there was a day that I remember my parents coming home and finding me lying on the bathroom floor, not only vomiting, but just in such excruciating pain. I was in a fetal position.
Yeah.
And my dad said, "That's it. You've got to give up some of this stuff. You're doing too much." It's, but that dramatically affected my life. I mean, that's who I was. I was somebody who loved, to be involved in a lot. And I had to give a whole lot up. I had to sacrifice a lot. And I mention that because so many of us, all of us who suffer with migraine, sacrifice a lot on a day-to-day basis, whether people recognize it or not. So I continued with, I guess would be called episodic migraine through my 20s and, early 30s. And then I also had severe endometriosis, and eventually I had a hysterectomy, complete hysterectomy. And I mentioned that because after that, I went into instant chronic migraine that I've never come back from.
Oh gosh, how interesting.
Yeah. And there was just, no combination of things that could bring me back from, from a chronic point. I mean, I certainly had better control over it at times and than others, for sure, through the years. But I had a wonderful, I started seeing an absolutely phenomenal headache specialist here in, I live in upstate Rochester, New York. And so I saw him for probably 20 years, and he was phenomenal. I don't think I'd be alive without him. Combined with the many other people that migrainer or a person suffering with migraine needs to have in their life in order to cope in the various ways that we do, or even medically. But he retired several years ago. And when he did, that was devastating, because that's another problem that maybe we can talk about. And that is that there are so few headache specialists in the United States. My understanding, and don't hold me to these numbers exactly, but while there's about 39 million migraine sufferers, there are only approximately 500 headache specialists. And boy, those numbers just don't work.
Gosh.
I'm so surprised that there's not more specialists, because I feel like headaches, as I mentioned earlier, is more of a common experience than some other conditions.
Correct. I mean, in fact, when you're in the middle of chronic migraine or a migraine, if you're episodic migraine, you feel like nobody's ever suffered what you're suffering, and yet, as you say, it's fairly common, particularly, I think 70% of people with migraine are women, and we need to talk about that because that's in my book very much, that's part of the stigma. But the other aspect of that is I actually asked a neurologist that I had seen for a period of time, a shorter period of time. I actually asked her, I said, why are there so few headache specialists? Because I had trouble finding one in Rochester once mine had retired. And she said, believe this or not, and this is a quote, that migraine is not considered a sexy disease.
Okay, but is any disease sexy? Like,
Yeah.
Really?
And it's not a sexy field to go into. And what she was saying by that, as she further explained, is that it's that basically she was reaffirming that there's still the stigma attached to it, that it's a woman's disease, going back to as you probably know, in the 18th and 19th century, that any woman with migraine was really diagnosed with hysteria, right?
Yeah.
And treated for hysteria. And so that stigma has, to this day, is still prominent. And therefore, it's not considered serious enough. And part of that is its invisibility, right? I mean, it's, I'm going through a hangover from a 6-day migraine now.
Oh my God.
You might not see that, right? And yet I know that I'm in that phase of migraine, and we can hide it really well. And part of the irony is that women, we're considered weaker, still there's that stigma, and yet we're really stronger because we put up a front and a mask that many couldn't, right? In order to function, carry on, do our jobs.
I like the idea of something that can bleed for almost a week straight and not die is something that you probably should be a little bit more scared of.
Yeah.
And I like to remind people in my life of that when it's that time of the month and they're like, what's wrong with you? Be like, look, could you do this?
Yeah.
No.
Right. Exactly. Yep. So I find myself now, so about 3 years ago, I was in a real intractable migraine that just, my headache specialist had retired. I was feeling very depressed. I was I was feeling out of control. I was feeling helpless. Didn't know where to turn next. Nothing was working. And I remember distinctly the day I walked into, I teach English at a community college. And I remember walking into my chair's office and, we were talking about that for a bit. And I remember walking out and thinking in the hallway on my way to my office, I need to do something positive with this. It's controlling my life right now. And I need to do something that pulls together the things that are the major parts of my life. And one, of course, is literature and teaching literature. And the other is migraine. So what can I do to bring these things together and do something positive for not only myself, but for others with this burden, this like as some of the writers in my book call it, this constant life companion. And that's when I, that was the seed really for this book. I didn't intend it to be a book initially. I just wanted to research and find out more, how many others are in the boat that I'm in? What other writers? There must be writers that have written, writers of fiction and poetry and drama that have written about their experience with migraine. And so I started doing some research, and then it just I got more and more passionate about it, and it became something real positive for me.
That was
personally.
something I found inspiring, even just like looking at the contents and the types of people that you have found who have written about it, Jane Austen, being one of them, that I was looking, even when I was just like skimming through, where I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be fascinating. And it makes you feel like, okay, those people had this challenge of having migraines as well. And look at what they still did. I can do something too.
Yes, good
And
point.
so even just in the contents, I felt more empowered and inspired. And I wanted to share that for our listeners.
I know, I appreciate that, because I think you make an excellent point. I mean, right. Look at, you still can do something very productive and meaningful, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's what this journey's been for me in writing the book, in this project.
Yeah.
We talked about earlier, I mentioned earlier before we started recording, that as someone who I've experienced migraines, I've had moments, like I have a very vivid memory of I was probably in elementary school, came home from school with the worst headache I'd ever experienced, fell asleep on the couch watching TV because that's all I could do, woke up, threw up, went back to lie down to the couch. And then the next time I woke up, I was fine.
Wow.
And it happened like a very, very small handful of times when I was very young. Now, if I feel like a bad head, I can tell the difference between this is just a little bit of a headache, or I'm going to hate my life if I don't take some ibuprofen. And I'm very, very, very fortunate that ibuprofen, even if it's a prescription strength amount, does generally knock out my headaches, my migraines for me. So I'm very, very thankful for that.
Yes.
So as someone who, I can kind of understand what it would feel like to experience a migraine, but I don't know what it feels like to experience it for days and days and days and days and days and days. But what I loved so much about the collection of stories, of poems, I particularly like the poems because I felt like it was a really good way to get into that kind of headspace of, oh my gosh, this is what it's like to live like this all the time.
Right.
So if anyone's listening to this and you're like, hey, I suffer from migraines, whether it's chronic migraines or just maybe it's part of just your daily life or your health or side effects of medications, then this book is something really nice to maybe share with the people around you so that they can maybe get a better understanding. Because I know that a lot of people share, well, this is what I'm going through. This is what I'm going through. This is what it feels like. But not everyone always gets it. But when you can hand like a book, like Cassie mentioned with Jane Austen in it and so many other people being like, this is what it's like to live with what I do every single day. It's really, really powerful. And I like that the book that you created is, yes, it has your story in it, but I love that you pulled from so many other different people as well and so many different genres. Because to me, the fact that it's this just very expansive collection, it made me feel how much deeper this can really go than like yes, hearing individual stories are great, but it was this whole other layer after layer after layer that I really, really enjoyed.
Yeah, expansive is a good word. I like that you said that, because that's how I felt too. And I think like I appreciate it too, because a lot of the people out there too may not know the differences between a headache and a migraine. I know that I didn't understand, like back when, just before we pressed record, we were talking about, I had a car accident and that's when I started having really bad migraines. And I broke the windshield and the window with the side of my head. It was real bad. And so my migraines were very much left-sided. And so for years, just like you were describing for years, no clues. I would just feel like I had been hit on the side of the head with a baseball bat. And I would just be completely like almost blacking out. And it was like a very one side to the other, full body kind of, it was awful. And it would last for a while, then it would kind of like go away, last for hours or something, maybe a day.
Right.
But it wasn't until about a year ago that I started having migraines that were lasting a couple days, where I like couldn't even look at a screen, any kind of light, sound, everything was just bothering me. And then it was a few months ago that my son started experiencing migraines. And in particular, one of them, I mean, his would kind of come out of nowhere too. He would just be at school, I mean, remote schooling right now, but doing his remote schooling. And then he would just be like, I'm tired. And then he'd go into bed. He'd like be asleep for a couple of hours or an hour or something, come out. And then one day he just went and threw up everywhere. same thing like Chelsea said, throw up everywhere, felt horrible. And again, he had kind of that migraine hangover for a couple of days. And I had really only learned about a year ago when I was experiencing it again. And I was like, I kept telling everyone I've had a headache for like 20 days, you know? And then I'm like, oh, I've had all these headaches. It's just really wearing me down. Do you remember, Chelsea?
Yep. I totally remember that.
And I hadn't realized. And I was like, I feel like I've just, you know, I was like, I've had a headache for like 5 weeks, you know? Yeah. And it wasn't until I was talking to my doctor about it and describing it all that they're like, yeah, those are migraines. And I just didn't even know, but because it felt so different, these ones felt different than my car accident induced ones, which were more of that like whack on the side of the head kind of feeling. These were more just like a full, I'm making hand motions from the back of my neck over to my forehead for those who can't see. And but thankfully that education and learning the difference between the two was enabled me to recognize in my son pretty much right away that I was like, I feel like you have a migraine. He's like, no, my head just really hurts and I want to throw up. And I'm like, yeah, that's not just a headache.
That's a migraine.
Yeah. And so it did give me a deeper understanding of what other people are going through. And so as Chelsea said, and as I said, I was so excited about your book because it is a kind of relatively common everyone knows what a everyone knows what a migraine or a headache is. Yeah. And maybe it's more like everyone knows someone who has migraines or something, it seems like. But your statistics of it being, 70% women and the hysteria, I mean, Chelsea and I could go on and on about that shit. We are so passionate about like advocating for women. And I don't know if you have heard of the book, Kathy, The Lady's Handbook for Her Mysterious Illness by Sarah Rainey.
No.
Okay, you should read it. Because
can you guys send me the link?
We'll send it to you, and we'll probably post it in the links of these show notes because we talk about it all the time.
Talk about it all the time. It's one of the best books we read last year. It came out last year.
And her book really your book and her book remind me of each other a lot in a very good way of sharing the true stories and the information. Yes, they're both incredible books.
Oh, I'd love to read it.
It's in like a really new. It's a different perspective. Like hers is written in a perspective that I haven't read before, similar to yours with taking all these other, like Chelsea said, expansive perspectives. I think you'll really enjoy it. It's
look forward to it.
Worth the read.
Hey everyone, I know you're enjoying this episode of the Real Life Show Living with a Chronic Illness, but we're going to pause for a moment because I want to tell you about our most recent offering to help you live your best life. It is mywellnesshub.co. At mywellnesshub.co, you will find a comprehensive resource library for chronic illness individuals to live their best life. You know, all those hours you spent searching on Google to find that thing that's going to help your pain, or that thing that's going to help you feel better, or what type of diet to work, what books to read, what podcasts to listen to, all the stuff. Well, we're putting all of that into one single resource library to make it easy for you to find the resources you need. And as part of that, we have our membership site, The Hub, where we're providing education for you at the low cost of $15 a month. You're going to get classes from experts around the freaking world, multiple times a month, multiple times a week. You'll have access to the recordings from the past, all sorts of really, really good stuff. So make sure you go check out mywellnesshub.co.
Excellent.
So one question I had that might be kind of nice for some of our listeners, and I would love, Kathy, you to kind of dive into this because you are the migraine experiencer here more than Cassie and I. Can you tell us the difference between a headache and a migraine? Like how can someone really know, okay, this is a bad headache versus this is a migraine?
Sure.
I know it's a hard question.
No, it is and it isn't. I think it's a complex question because one of the reasons when I was organizing the book, I originally thought, I'll organize it chronologically with, the author, the writers, because I have one medieval writer in there, right? And I got them all the way up. And I thought, no. I need to organize this around themes, around the themes that affect migraine sufferers the most. And so so the reason in answering your question, one of the chapters I have is that if you have migraine, I think it's my second to last chapter is it's a full-time lifelong job.
Mm-hmm.
So migraine isn't just a headache. And that's one of the other chapters. It's just a headache ? Because that if you say you have a migraine, somebody says, one of the worst things you can say to somebody if you say I have a migraine is, can I give you Tylenol? Can I get, because I mean, I know it's done and well-intentioned and all of that, but all it does is say to the person suffering, you don't get it. You have no idea what I'm really suffering. Because a migraine is multi-layered. A migraine affects the entire being. It isn't just a headache. The headache is one component of migraine. For instance, and I only learned this, and again, a lot, I think, with the misunderstanding and the stigma attached to migraine is just a lack of people understanding what we now know about migraine that we didn't know, say, back when I was young. And we know that a migraine has a cycle to it. And we know that cycle begins with, for some people, they have auras, right? The physical sensations and colors and patterns and all of that they know then they're going to be getting the attack. Most people think that most people with migraine get auras, but that's not true. Only 20% of people with migraine have aura beforehand. But most of us do have warning signs, and they can be very unusual signs so that you wouldn't immediately pick them up. So, for instance, and I only learned this through my own experience and then reading something like one of the essays I ended up using in the book. And I said, oh my God, that's me. I do that. I do that all the time before a migraine. And that is excessive yawning.
Oh.
It's unbelievable.
I yawn all the time.
You do yawn a lot, Chelsea. Chelsea does yawn a lot.
You're a yawner anyway.
She yawns enough that it doesn't do that social cue to make me yawn.
Yeah.
Wow, that is a lot.
The fact that we're recording this in the afternoon and I'm not sitting here yawning the entire time, Kathy, is truly half a miracle. Because normally I'm sorry. I call myself a chronic yawner. I'm like, I'm not bored. I'm always yawning.
No, I think some people do yawn more. I know at a certain time of day I tend to anyway, but it gets so excessive that it brings on I also have TMJ, which a lot of migraine sufferers have. And it'll bring it on because I cannot stop it. I mean, it's to the point that if I'm in a store or if I were at work, if I were teaching, and it's
talking about it's making me yawn now.
Yeah, I know. You cannot stop it. And it's embarrassing, and you have to get yourself out of that situation. And who would have ever thought that was a trigger? I mean, not a trigger. I'm sorry, not a trigger. A warning.
Cue.
Yeah.
For a migraine coming probably within the next 24 hours.
How interesting.
Yeah. And it turns out I'm not alone. I mean, when I read this and I read that this was the case, I thought, my gosh. So, so we get warning signs. A lot of people get the hypersensitivity to light, to sound. I get it to sound. I know that my poor husband, if he can have the television at normal volume, and all of a sudden out of the blue, I'll just say, you got to turn that down. I can't take it. And so hypersensitivity to touch, to smell. Again, I don't have all of those, but many people do. And so there are the warning signs. Then there's, the attack itself. Which is the severe headache, and that headache is different for a lot of people. For me, it always is the same. It comes up through my neck. It starts with neck pain and it comes up over in my right eye. And, but then, when I say it affects the whole body, there's this whole other element. There's the cognitive element of it. So when you hear people talk about a migraine fog, they're not kidding. What happens is, for me, is I lose a lot of cognitive function. I lose memory. I lose the ability to come up with words. I use I saw that.
I know.
Yeah, okay, y'all, I haven't yawned for 30 minutes. We start talking about how much I yawn.
I know.
And
You
I've
make
yawned
me
3
yawn, too.
times in the past 2 minutes.
I saw a half of one a minute ago.
I'm really good at
I
hiding it,
almost laughed.
Kathy.
I almost laughed. It's funny. And what was I saying? Word drop, so
right.
Can you imagine? I'm a professor and I'm teaching a class, English class, right? Language, I use language. And all of a sudden I can't come up with the most common word. I mean, the most common word, like I might mean to say novel, rather than, short story or something. And I cannot come up with it. And hiding those things, masking those problems can be really difficult. You appear clumsy. And so some people think you're almost drunk, but it's something that takes over the whole body. And you feel there's an essay I have in there, an excerpt from an essay calling a general feeling of disorder. I think it's by Oliver Sacks, who wrote the great book on migraine. And that's what it captures it beautifully. In addition to the migraine attack, the headache attack, there's this general feeling of disorder. Everything's not right with you. You are not you. So, and then after the attack, which can be for some people hours, it can be days, it can be weeks, it can be months, because the cycle is can go back and forth. For me, it's like I can start to feel like I'm coming out of it, and then I go back, and I know that's true for many, many people. And you feel like then the fear is that when or if you'll come out of it,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point, that it can change as well. So one person may experience migraine slightly different than another, like you said, for hours or maybe for a couple of days, but then later or a different time in life, it could be weeks and months.
Yes.
And it like drives you nuts, kind of, when you have this feeling in your head constantly. For me, it makes me feel, it definitely makes me feel bad about myself in a lot of ways. Kind of like you said, that cognitive stuff that you have, that's a big symptom of mine too. And even of just exhaustion with living with a chronic illness and chronic pain, getting that. And it'll be so frustrating when you feel like you're almost having like an out of body experience of like, I cannot get this word. And when in your mind, you can think it all completely clearly. At least for me, that's how it feels. In my mind, it's all there, crystal clear. And I can't get there. I can't get to it. And I can't get my words to get it and find it and bring it out, especially. And that feeling, like I said, it'll drive you nuts out of kind of like frustration in a way.
Yeah, right.
And kind of like you said, like it can feel embarrassing at times. I mean, I know that I frequently won't speak up, like if I'm at like a fancy dinner or something, let's say with people, I won't speak up about something because I'm afraid that I won't be able to grab the words that I need. And I know that that's not necessarily super specific to migraine, but maybe chronic pain and chronic illness as a whole that many of us experience. But I'm glad that you addressed that cognitive aspect, and also the overall feeling of disorder is such a good way to put it, because it's just like everything is off.
Definitely. And I think your moods fluctuate a lot too during the course of it. I know I can go from being teary and emotional to being rageful, even so and it can change. It's hard, I think that's another thing we need to say. It's very hard to live with someone who suffers with migraine. You need such a good support system who does get it, and I think that's really vital.
That's huge, because we have a friend, and I actually think her episode is coming up before yours. So Abby Morris, and she's a chronic migraine sufferer. She has POTS and migraines. and she's had them for many, many years. And she has it like just nailed down to a T of exactly what she needs when she starts to feel it trickling on. She has a list of what she needs.
Yep.
And she's recently married, and she talks to us about how she kind of like laid the ground rules with her now husband, of where she's like, if I have a migraine, I'm going to bed. Don't touch me, but bring me a Dr. Pepper and a burger.
That's
and
great.
like, yeah, and like leave me alone.
Yeah.
And it's love actually between them, for her to speak up of what she needs.
Yes.
And for him to respect it and do it, and maybe just give her a little hug and give her the Dr. Pepper and then leave her in the dark.
Or don't give her a hug if she doesn't want to be touched.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly, because she gets so sensitive, like you said, to
Right.
the touch, to the light, to the everything. And she has found these tricks after trying all sorts of things that's what makes her get through it. And Chelsea and I just really thought it was cool that she found her voice to speak up to her loved one, saying, this is what I need. And how much nicer it was to take that pressure off their relationship, that he can give that to her. Because you're right. It is hard to live with someone who has migraines or any chronic illness. It's hard for anyone to have that, because there's just an extra layer of unknown that you're frequently living with.
Yeah. And the other unknown too is that you feel like you can't, and I think you're the people you live with have to deal with this too, is that you can't plan anything.
Yeah.
You sometimes feel like, you can plan it, but then those people have to understand that you may not be able to do it, whatever that event is. And it's a terrible, and that's really hard on a family too. I mean, I think that, for your loved ones. And so I think that you're absolutely right to be able to voice what you need. And I don't know about, did you say her name's Abby?
Yeah, Abby.
Yeah, Abby. But, you have also this enormous regimen of medications that you take, to prevent, and then these rescue medications that you take, and they all have their side effects, and your loved ones have to live with those as well as you. So, it's tough on a lot of people.
It is.
So there was something you said earlier that I wrote down because I wanted to kind of circle back to it, of how you like to be involved in a lot of things, and you kind of got to a point where you were kind of told, oh, you need to choose some of these things. And that resonated with me a lot because, and Cassie knows this, I like to be busy. Not only do we have this podcast and our Spoonies business and our Spoonies nonprofit, but I have my own business. I teach Pilates, I teach bar. I've got lots of stuff. I enjoy being busy. I'm someone who, I don't want to be over busy, but I like having stuff to do. And one thing that I don't know if battled with is the right word, but been really trying to find a balance, knowing that if I don't take care of myself, the health that I have could easily go away.
Yes.
And people have literally worked as harder than me and made themselves sick.
Yeah, burned out.
Yeah. And so I know chronic fatigue, adrenal fatigue, messing up your hormones. I mean, there's a whole wide range of things that can happen. And so when you're like, oh yeah, I kind of wanted to pull back, but I liked to be involved. And I think that there's this kind of idea that if you have a chronic illness, you can't go do stuff or you can't be as involved, you can't do things. And so I would love to hear you maybe talk a little bit about how you kind of balance being able to be involved in ways that you really want to, or if you have tips on choosing which things you say yes to, what you say no to, while always making sure that you're still taking care of yourself.
I can speak to it, but I'm probably a poor example of somebody, being totally honest with you, a poor example of someone who does balance well. I think
balance is this thing we all strive for that I don't know if it fully actually exists.
But I think some people are better at it than others. And I have to say, I don't think that's one of my strengths. And I think that's why perhaps I suffer more with migraine than I would if I did do a little bit more with self-care and recognize more when to say no to things. And I've started doing more with self-care in terms of physically, in terms of, I've been up and down on roller coaster in terms of like physical activity, because I know physical activity is really good for migraine and chronic illness. And yet when you're in pain, it's really hard to be physically active. So there's that difficult cycle. But in the last several months, I've really committed myself to eating healthier, and I work with a personal trainer, and I've, and I feel good about that. I feel good about taking care of myself, taking that time out of the day to say, that's time I need, in order to take care of me. I think the time I spend working on anything related to my project, to my book, and to my passion for that is my time. I think that's my me time quite a bit right now, because ever since I got involved in doing it, and I'd never published anything before in my life, and so it was a whole brand new 3-year journey and experience. That's my passion. That's where I can go and to get inside myself and get away from everything else. I think, I'm teaching remotely now, and I find that extraordinarily difficult, and I don't enjoy it nearly as much as working with my students face to face. And so I find balancing. In fact, I just went to a conference, about teaching remotely and how to find balance while you're doing that, because you always feel like you could be doing more to, maybe I could learn more technology to better help my students, and so it's finding that balance when you're working at home to turn it all off, right? And many people are dealing with that with any working remotely now. And so far, I'm struggling with finding that balance. So taking times, I guess I think I wrote an article I write blogs for Psychology Today on migraine. And I started doing that a couple of months ago. And I wrote one about, I think, what the importance of pets are, when you have chronic illness. And I think how I wrote about, what I think they do for us in terms of that self-care. And I have 2 golden retrievers and a cat, and they allow me self-care, because I walk them, I spend a lot of quality time with them. So I think we all have to find our own ways of doing that. And again, it's probably not one of my strengths to speak to, but it's something, you're right, we always strive to keep remembering how important that is.
Well, I really like that you mentioned working on your project and on your book is your me time, because that's something that I kind of realized in recent months, and even what I messaged Chelsea about. I've had 2 surgeries recently in the last 3 months, and it was really hard doing computer work, sitting, etc., energy, exhaustion, pain, blah, blah, blah. But I started noticing that my depression and anxiety would creep in so easily and during the days that I wasn't working on all of our chronic illness, Spoonie podcasts, nonprofit stuff. And so although it took energy, brain energy, physical energy, sometimes physical pain to sit at my desk or whatever, it was worth the emotional and mental joy and passion and kind of feeling invigorated that I would get from doing that work. But I started being like, you know what? I don't actually have to treat this as just working and taking my energy, in air quotes, because this also makes me feel better emotionally.
Absolutely.
And with the exercise too, Chelsea and I have talked about this a lot on many episodes, consistency. I went for a little walk today. I'm walking about half of the distance as I was before my last surgery in almost twice the time. So I'm walking very slowly and very small steps. But I went for the walk today because I was like, you know what? I didn't go all of last week, and I will feel better overall this week if I go for 30 minutes today. And I think that's one of the biggest things with chronic illness is when you are trying to find that balance and playing with consistency and looking at big picture, when sometimes like you said, we can't plan, and we get stuck in the small picture, and we get stuck in the few hours or that day. And sometimes you do have to pull yourself out and still look at big picture.
Good point.
And I want to ask another question too, but Chelsea, it looked like you had something to say about balance, so I don't want to cut you off and change the topic.
Oh, I just wanted to thank you, Kathy, for sharing that, because I think a lot of people are like, oh, I have to be perfect at this balance. And I think you did a really good job of being like, hey, I'm not great at it, but I'm trying. And you're like, yes, you mentioned that maybe you'd have less migraines if you focused on it a little bit more, but you're still able to live the life that you seem like you want to for the most part. Like, you still get to teach, you still get to work, and you've been able to create this amazing book. And so I think that I think it's good for people to hear that, like, you don't have to be perfect at it. And sometimes, yeah, you maybe will choose to get involved in something and you're going to quote unquote overwork yourself. And yeah, it might lead to a migraine, but if you really enjoyed the overwork that you did, then maybe it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, you know what? I think that's a great point too, because a lot of times I'll do, we all have our triggers for migraine too, right? And part of living with it over a long period of time is that you start to learn what those triggers are. And like, I don't have any food triggers. I don't have, a lot of common ones, but I know what mine are. And I know there are times when I think, if we're honest with ourselves, we say, we know what, if we go ahead and do such and such, we know what we're risking. But you have to say to yourself, I'm doing this and I know the risk, so that, and I think that's important, because then it's like, you're taking it on, but you're saying it may be worth it. You know,
you don't have to, you can kind of take some of the guilt out and not beat yourself up about it.
Exactly. And I think that's really important.
It is. It's super important. I had a giant
chronic illness is outside of your control. So much is, but this, like, maybe doing this one thing, you have control over whether or not you're going to do it.
Yeah.
And you make that choice whether or not you are. Sometimes I make bad choices.
Yeah.
And other times I make good choices.
Yeah. I'm really glad that you mentioned that too, because last night I had a giant glass of white wine, and and it was like, it's probably not the best choice, but I just, my stepdad really enjoys drinking wine, and he refuses to ever drink alone. It was a promise he made to himself. And so me not being able to consume alcohol hardly ever, because mostly of my Crohn's disease, it's like, poor him, And so I made a really nice dinner last night, and he's like, oh, a nice glass of wine would go really well with this. And I was like, it would. And I rented a movie on Amazon, and I was like, yeah, I'm having a huge glass. I'm going to enjoy this movie and this food, and it's going to be totally worth whatever the repercussions are. And eliminating that stress and the quite literally, like, chemical reaction of the stress, like cortisol and all of that, for beating myself up, like getting rid of that bit and just enjoying it, it's way better than doing it anyway and like beating myself up about it all night later, the next day.
Absolutely. That's a great example.
So I'm all about that. And so I know that we still have a little bit of time. You very briefly touched on the fact that you had severe endometriosis and a hysterectomy, which then, spiraled all of your migraines out of control again for you. And I don't want to not talk about that or dismiss that, because that's another one of those diagnoses or whatever, that women, it's not important, it's not sexy, it's women, everything's fine, you're fine, you just have cramps, you just
have bad.
Yeah, you're just being a girl about it, Yeah. And which is so not okay. And so how could you just briefly share a little bit maybe about what it was like to get that diagnosis? Was it challenging to get the diagnosis, to be heard about having that diagnosis, and then eventually leading to having a hysterectomy? And I know that our episode is more about the migraines in relation to everything with that, but that this is a part of your journey.
Yeah. In fact, I will tell you that, I suffered that disease largely by myself. I felt more alone in that disease than I do in migraine. And I've been so thrilled. Like I even seen, like, since I came upon you guys and your group, and to see so much that is now being, written about and talked about concerning that disease that I never knew another soul in my life that had that disease, and never knew anyone else who talked about it. And I think I'd had it for years before it was ever diagnosed. And I just assumed, I had these just absolutely horrendous, not just cramps, but bleeding. And I mean, just this, the whole, I mean, it was unbelievable. And it wasn't until believe me, I was doing research and I never got to read anything about it. I never did. And then I went through, I had a wonderful doctor I worked with, but we put me on medication that basically, I mean, I'm being very honest with you here, made me infertile, so I couldn't have children, and which changed my life, of course. And then while that controlled it for a period of time, it just kept getting worse and worse. And then finally we talked about, the hysterectomy, and we talked about trying to, all depending on how severe it was, if it was going to be total, and, and so on. He said he would try to save one ovary if he could, and blah, blah, blah. Well, he was so severe, it was in and around other organs. And so again, still never, so I was only in my 30s when I had a hysterectomy, and then, believe it or not, I was the first case in this whole area where this happened. I started getting the symptoms again.
Oh
and
my
I
gosh.
started getting, and I, at first, he didn't believe me. The doctor, it cannot be. I mean, there's just no way you could have this. I said, I'm sorry, it's happening again. So he had to go in and do exploratory surgery again. And he found that there was more of it that had started growing in different places. So I had a second surgery, and again, still having known no one or read anything about it by anyone. And then when I was researching, so nobody understood it. Nobody got what I was going through. And then when I was researching the migraines, I found this incredible book, and I want to run into my other office and get it. And I was reading about, it was a memoir, and I was reading about her migraines, and there was this huge part of it was about her suffering endometriosis. And I thought, oh my God, this is somebody who gets it. This is the first time I've ever read about. And I wrote to her as an author, and because I'm using this piece from her book about migraine, and I said, you won't believe what you did for me. You're the first person I could read about that made me feel I wasn't alone. This is what I went through. And so that made it even more important for me to do what I was doing, because I thought, if I can do that with people with migraine, what she did for me with that. But that is a very misunderstood, very invisible illness that is stigmatized. And I'm just so glad to see now, as I've started to see on a lot of chronic illness websites, starting to see it being talked about.
There's definitely people are talking about it. And
so thank you to you guys for doing that.
Oh my gosh, of course. Well, thank you for sharing your experience and your story and being vulnerable with us. It's really means a lot to us that you've opened up to share that. And it's one of those invisible illnesses, and for women that we are so dismissed. And Chelsea and I have talked to many endometriosis survivors and warriors, and the amount of dismissing with doctors, it's just awful to see. And another book that you might like that just came out in October is called Vagina Problems by Laura Parker, and she has endometriosis, and she is one of the biggest one of the biggest advocates that I have found online. She's an editor at BuzzFeed, and she just she really talks about everything that no one talks about. And I feel like just with me following her and reading her articles, then of course I read her book, I had a deeper understanding for everything that's also encompassed in endometriosis, with pelvic pain, vaginal pain, bladder problems. I mean,
irritable bowel syndrome comes
exactly, like full body stuff.
Yeah.
And so I can only imagine the challenge it was for you to deal with that 20 years ago, when it was so little was known about it. Because even now, in this day and age, when it is being talked about more, and there's definitely a social media presence and awareness, and women talking about it in books, but it's still so hard to get doctors to listen. So thinking of what that would have been like before, I just,
Can you tell you one quick quote from a doctor I had?
Yeah.
This is what I left him after this and went to someone else.
I'm like, this is going to be one of those quotes that makes me really mad, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he was so dismissive. He was an OBGYN, and his wife was, okay? So you'd think he'd kind of get it a little bit, right? He said, when I was saying to him that the bloating was so severe that, I looked 9 months pregnant all of the time, and I couldn't take the pain with that, and the pressure from wearing any clothes, and all of that. He looked at me, leaned back in his desk, and he said, bloating, bloating, bloating. He said, everybody wants to explain their weight gain by bloating. He said, I told my wife, when I get home from work, I've said to my wife at dinner, if I hear one more woman talk about bloating.
Did his wife stay with him after this?
I have no idea, because I never went back.
Because you're like, I'm out of here.
Because if
that stayed with me for so long, and the anger and the rage that I had about that was so, it's visceral now. I mean, I can just.
Yeah,
I can't.
I feel that visceral curiosity where I want to be like, F you, mother F.
Yeah, exactly. You got
throw something across the room and storm out.
Yeah. I wanted to storm right out of there.
Yeah, any boys that are listening to this, or anyone who just has never experienced a period and what that can do to your body, please, for the love of all things good, never blame a woman or anyone else that's experiencing a period, no matter what your gender identity is. Don't blame their emotions or their feelings or anything on that, because my fiance is amazing. I'm going to start the story off with that. But there was one time where he was like, well, I just kind of thought it was your period making you a little grumpy and upset, and I have anxiety. And I was like, nope. I'm like, I would have felt the exact same way, whether or not I was having this thing happen inside my body. And I know like how dismissed I felt when people are like, oh, well, you're just on your period. It's just that. And I'm like, no. So anyone listening that's never experienced a period, just don't use that as a reason for anything. Just don't.
They're still your feelings. Like maybe those feelings are heightened on your period, but they are still your feelings, and you're still experiencing it. And I have to say that my son went through sex ed, and he came home one day from middle school, and he was like, Mom, you girls have it like so much harder.
Yes, we do.
And I was like,
yes, we do.
Never forget that.
Yes, never forget it ever. Ever.
And so I'm really hoping that I'm setting him up to be like the most wonderful man to women on earth.
Sounds like you are. Sounds like you are.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm definitely trying. But yeah, that's the thing, Chelsea, is like I started just being like, I'm still going through those feelings. I'm still living in that. And so it makes them real and it makes them valid. So what if they're heightened? Oh, yeah. So Chelsea and I are both dog lovers also.
Oh, wonderful.
And
yeah, my dogs just lost their
okay, watch
shit.
this. Oh, then hold on one second.
I'm going to have to look up your article because my dog, I can't picture living without a dog.
Yeah.
It brings me so much joy and comfort. And
I'm really lucky because one of okay,
so
if
pretty.
you're not on the Spoonie Hub and able to watch the video of this, go get on the Spoonie Hub right now, just so you can see these videos of Kathy. Kathy, say hi. And what are your names of your dogs?
I was just going to ask, yeah.
Okay, sure. On this side is Oliver. We call him Ollie. He's named after my favorite contemporary poet, Mary Oliver.
Cute.
And this is Greta. And Greta is named after, my husband's an English professor as well, retired. But our favorite short story is by James Joyce, and it has a character in it named Greta. And so Greta is just turning 8 this month, and Ollie is 5.
Oh,
They're both, by the way, they're both certified therapy dogs. And they, when we are in session at my college, they are the official MCC therapy dogs. So they go, one of them goes each day to work with me and gets to be in my classes, and we go to other people's classes to calm them down before exams. And we go to departments.
This is amazing.
It is. It's a lot of fun.
I'm trying
love
to find
that.
a picture of my dog right now.
I think, Cassie, we should probably do an episode on therapy and service animals, because
I was thinking the same thing.
One of my dogs, the reason I have her is because she was a rescue, a woman that worked at the same university that I did. She rescued a dog and was training her to be a therapy animal. Well, long story short, she didn't pass her therapy animal tests, whatever, to be an official therapy dog. And the woman couldn't keep her if she couldn't be she needed to be able to have her travel with her and do all those things. And so she was like, I have this really, really well-trained dog that I just want to go to a good home.
Yeah.
And I was a grad student at the time, and I was like, I really want a dog. And after thinking about it for a really, 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 really long time, because I lived in a very small apartment, and I was like, should I get a dog? Is it responsible? Blah, blah, blah. I decided to get her, and she is absolutely amazing.
Where is she?
I lock them out of my office. The door is closed, because otherwise they will come in and they go click, 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 click.
And these guys would come tearing down the hallway here. I know.
So my dogs are currently barking at whoever just rang my doorbell, probably to deliver a package. And she's amazing, because when I'm feeling like just anxious for no reason, like, and I go lie in bed and I'm trying to like read or distract myself, she can tell when someone's feeling really anxious, and she'll come up and she'll lie. She likes her personal space, but when I'm feeling particularly anxious, she will come and she will lie down right next to me, and she'll make me pet her and give her attention. And it just makes me feel better. And I don't know what I would do without her. I do not know how I made it through I wouldn't have made it through grad school without her.
I believe it. No, they're everything.
They're everything.
They're the best.
Yeah, I'm going to have to look at that article. And Chelsea, we should totally do an episode about it.
Yeah, definitely.
That would be so much fun. Yay. This was so much fun.
This was so much fun. Great. Kathy, this has been wonderful. Everyone, Kathy's book is linked in the show notes. Make sure you go check it out. If you suffer from migraines, if you don't suffer from migraines, there's a lot that you can learn. And because it's a collection of so many different pieces, it's actually like really easy just to open it. Or we got a PDF version, and so just to like click through to a section and just like spend a couple minutes reading a section if that's all you have time for. Which I kind of like books where it's like, I don't have to commit to reading a 30-page chapter.
Or also, there might be a piece that doesn't, it doesn't resonate with you, and you just then you go you find the one that does, or those that do, so.
I really enjoyed a lot of the poetry that was in it, because I felt like it was something easy for my brain to read. It was easy to digest while really being impactful. Like, it was easy to read, but I like felt it deep inside my soul. I was like, this is intense. This is a challenging thing to live with. And so thank you so much for putting it together. It's a beautiful collection, and everyone needs to go read it.
Yes, thank you so much. I've so enjoyed meeting you both, and if you do that therapy dog one, let me be part of it.
We'll let you know.
That would be so fun. Yeah, we'll have to let you know. We need to get it on the books, because that sounds really fun. And thank you again so much for coming on with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to meet you both.
Thanks for listening. If you love this podcast and want to show your support, please leave a review, share the podcast with others, or join us in the Spoonie Hub.
If you'd like to connect with Cassie and I, you can find us on Instagram @TheRealSpooniesUnite or on our website, mywellnesshub.co, where you can find all sorts of resources and you can find the Spoonie Hub. Talk to you soon.